It's often said that death is the great equalizer, but so too is grief. No matter how much money, fame, resources, intelligence we have, at some point in life, we will all experience loss and the mourning that it brings. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote that sorrow makes us all children again, destroys all differences of intellect. The wisest know nothing. It's true, you can't think your way out of grief, but there is some wisdom that can help us endure it and then come back from it to return to life and find joy in living again.
Shiva is a mourning period of 7 days. It has a series of rules which help a mourner who doesn't really know what to do and helps a community who doesn't always know how to support.
On this episode of How God Works, we'll talk to Rabbi Angela Buchdahl about how Jewish mourning rituals like the practice of Shiva can guide the process of grieving in a way that leads to healing.
It gives us a roadmap for how you support and a roadmap for the mourner for how you mourn.
And we'll speak with Columbia University psychologist George Bonanno about what most people get wrong about grief and what we can do to be more resilient in the face of great loss.
It's that process of coalescing all those memories into kind of a more stable story of the person that we can take with us forward.
I'm Dave DeSteno, and this is How God Works. Most of us have heard of the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But according to George Bonanno, one of the nation's leading experts on bereavement and resilience and author of the book The End of Trauma, that's not how it works.
Unfortunately, there's not an objective truth to the 5 stages. They do not exist. People do not show these patterns.
So why have they persisted?
People seem to like the idea. And I think people like the idea because it's a roadmap. Whether it's an accurate roadmap or not, it's a roadmap. And it tells people, well, this is what you can expect.
But inaccurate roadmaps can be harmful. You think you're going one place and end up somewhere else. It can be disorienting.
Many people will then be wondering what they've done wrong, or people will be told by their friends they need to do this or that because they're not grieving properly.
So in the early 90s, George set out to redraw the map, to offer a truer path through mourning. But first, he needed to better understand how people actually grieve, something that was surprisingly under-researched at that point.
The bereavement field was, I think, really floundering. There wasn't a lot of really good scientific research at that time, and a lot of the ideas about bereavement seemed really out of date with the rest of the things we learned in psychology. So we began to design these studies, and, we didn't know at the time, will people come in and do this? And in fact, we were surprised at how willing people were to come in and do the things we asked them to do. One of the things that stood out that people told us was they wanted to share what they were going through to make it easier for other people. And they felt that what they'd seen in the books about bereavement was not accurate. It was not speaking to them. And so therefore they wanted to come into the research studies to share their experience to help other bereaved people.
After 3 decades of research, George has developed a far more accurate depiction of the grieving process, one that helps guide and validate different ways and timelines for processing grief. He's grouped them into 3 main coping styles.
One of them, unfortunately, is a trajectory of a long and difficult process of grieving and recovery. This path is usually less than 10%, and people struggle with really high levels of grief, depression for several years at least. Another path we see is what we call the recovery pattern, in which people struggle with quite a bit of pain, quite a bit of depression, grief symptoms, etc., for somewhere around a half a year, 6 months or so, and then they gradually begin to recover. It sometimes takes a year or 2 before they kind of return to where they were before. They may still have painful thoughts and emotions, but they're functioning relatively normally.
And then there's the third and most common path, called the resilience trajectory. For 2/3 of people, even though grief is painful in the short term, they can and will get through it and find joy on the other side.
Another way to think about it is a stable trajectory of healthy functioning. People who show this pattern basically struggle a little bit initially with the shock, the pain of the loss. Within a week or two, sometimes within a few days, sometimes a little bit longer, sometimes a month, they begin to function as they had normally. That doesn't mean they're still not in pain at times. It doesn't mean they don't miss the person, but they're able to kind of put it aside long enough during the day so that they can do what they need to do, they can take care of and be close to and actually enjoy the people that they're with, experience moments of joy.
So, is it fair to say, then, one of the best ways or most functional ways to manage this in terms of the trajectories is not to suppress grief, not to deny it. It's normal to feel the pain, but not to let it become too intense so that it is kind of paralyzing or prevents you from functioning, or to let it go on too long.
That's very true, David. I think sometimes we get a little carried away with the idea that, we should grieve for months and months and months. Of course, some people can't help it. They can't get over the loss and they really struggle, which is very sad and very unfortunate. But for most of us, I think this process is extremely effective and it does run its course relatively more quickly than we think it does.
The reality is, we will move in and out of grief while we mourn. It doesn't make us callous or insensitive or avoidant. It makes us human.
So we oscillate in and out of these states. So we might feel intense sadness for 30 seconds, 2 minutes, maybe 3 or 4, 5 minutes even. And then we kind of slip away from it. And then we might go back into it and slip away from it. When we feel sad, we tend to think, I've been sad 24/7 for 2 weeks. But in fact, that isn't what happens. We couldn't be in any emotion consistently all day long for 2 weeks. It would be exhausting. It would be physiologically impossible.
One reason grief is so hard is that a death brings on a kind of cognitive dissonance. It's not just sad. It's confusing. It doesn't make sense.
We have all this experience of the person in our head, and that doesn't go away when they die. We have this memory of the person. It feels like they're still there. We know they're dead. We know they're no longer physically in the material world. And what do we do with that representation? And we have so many different memories of the people we're close to. And it's that process of coalescing all those memories into kind of a more stable story of the person that we can take with us forward.
One way to construct that stable story of someone is through rituals of mourning, a means of eulogizing the person who's passed. We come together to share positive memories and stories about them. It seems natural because we all do it. But if you stop to think about it, it's actually kind of strange. If I just lost a job I love, or if my wife, whom I love dearly, divorced me, I wouldn't want to spend a lot of time thinking about how wonderful that job or my wife was. It would just make the pain worse and make me miss them all the more. But when it comes to mourning someone, this process does something positive. It helps us heal.
What we've seen is not so much only positive memories, but the ability to have comfort from positive memories, the ability to use those memories to feel comfort in the other person's presence. And one thing we found was that people who struggled more, when they moved back to where they're functioning somewhat as they used to, then they begin to have those positive, comforting memories as well, where they couldn't have them before. There's a great passage in C.S. Lewis's exceptionally wonderful book called A Grief Observed, in which he felt as he lost his wife twice. He lost her in her death, and he lost her in that he couldn't quite remember her. And when he began to recover, when he began to sleep well at night, then he began to remember her fully, and then he had those comforting, positive memories.
So in some senses, those positive memories kind of go hand in hand with that recovery process, with coming back to a normal state of functioning.
It's a memory we can live with. We can live with the loss because we have this positive memory of the person.
Building that memory is also a communal process.
My father died when I was 23. I'm comfortable saying I had a fairly difficult relationship with him, and particularly when I was younger, when I was a teenager, a troublemaking teenager. And at his funeral, one of his old friends, a coworker, came up to me and sat down next to me. He said, "Do you know your dad was a really good man?" And he then elaborated on several memories he had. And that had a profound impact on me because it added this piece to the story. It gradually worked its way into my memory of my father. That was an important thing to take forward with me.
And so now when you think about him in the sense of him being with you in that consolidated way where you know he's not here, but the memory is, that's now part of the story.
That's exactly right. It's part of the story. Yeah. And I think that's where we see a person in this broader perspective, and it allows us to make sense of them, if you will, and to accept and move on.
Helping people navigate both their own end of life as well as helping the mourners is probably my most sacred and in many ways meaningful task I have as a rabbi.
Rabbi Angela Buchdahl leads New York City's Central Synagogue. She takes particular care to support her congregants who are mourning, and one way she does that is by helping them recall and share memories.
Those endings matter. So, when people gather at a deathbed, when they know that someone is about to leave this earth, having loved ones have opportunities to both share memories, to offer love, to make sure there's nothing left unsaid, to release them, to say, you can go, we're going to be okay. These are very powerful, important things that people can do near the end. It brings closure for both the person who's leaving this earth, and it often brings tremendous comfort and can resolve things for people who sometimes don't find another opportunity to say those things.
When a person passes, Jewish people honor them with a quick burial, which can help the mourners start to move on to that next stage of their grief.
The belief is we should bury a loved one as quickly as possible, both for the dignity of the body of the deceased. We consider it the last mitzvah or commandment or good thing you can do for a loved one's physical body is to give them a proper burial and as quickly as possible. Sometimes a day or two, and certainly we try not to do more than 3 days before a funeral. It's customary actually to have someone, a shomer, which literally means a guard, who sits with the body after it's been deceased and reads psalms and just accompanies it before burial. So that kind of that body's never alone. So they're not just exposed in that state. But also it functions to kind of very quickly move us to the next stage of grief.
But in the immediate aftershock of losing someone, Judaism also recognizes the need for space. For mourners, obligations are removed during what's called aninut, the time from death to when the burial occurs.
Nothing is expected of you. There's kind of an understanding that you're just not going to behave as you rationally ever do when you just have found out that someone has died. So there are not a lot of rules, and there's no expectation for you. I think your only job is to arrange for a funeral for your loved one. That's your only job. You don't work, you don't have to take care of things, and your community is really kind of instructed to just sweep in and help you make those arrangements and prepare. And usually your clergy does as well. So a rabbi will often come in, and before burial, a rabbi will be sitting with the family. A funeral intake is what I call it, but essentially it's an opportunity to actually sit with a family in that in-between stage between death and burial, where you help guide them, direct them, and enable them to honor a life the way that you know they want to do it. Because sometimes people are too shocked to kind of be in that place. So part of what I do is I jog people's memories and invite reminiscences. I think of that as the beginning of the mourning process officially, because just saying those memories out loud becomes its own healing Something about the memory becomes more real when you've said it out loud in front of other people, and sometimes even in front of your rabbi. And then it also provides a little fodder and gets people's juices going for thinking about eulogies. And I think in particular for cases where let's say someone has had Alzheimer's and hasn't been themselves for 15 years, or has had a long, prolonged illness, or is 95 years old. Part of the process of my asking questions about the life is it reminds you of a person's fullness of life, not just who they were at the end.
My dad, who passed away a few years ago, about 4 years before he passed, he had a major stroke, which basically decimated his ability to speak. And so he couldn't really speak, and it changed his personality. And fortunately, he had time with us and my mom that he enjoyed, but he was a different person. And I remember when he passed, writing the eulogy and thinking about that. And I wish I had someone with me at the time who was helping me to jog my memory, because I did the best that I could. But in that moment when you're feeling that shock, it's kind of hard to do. And so I can see why you think that role is really important in shaping that narrative.
So much of this is about honoring the life. I'm sure your father would not want to be remembered just for who he was post-stroke in the last years of his life, but the fullness, saying, tell me who he was, what was his childhood like? Tell me how he met your mother as a young man, what drove him, what were his values, how would he want to be remembered? These are the kinds of questions that help us think about the fullness. And sometimes we need to take a step back to actually be able to see that. And sometimes we need someone else to ask us the questions and get us talking, especially for those who've been kind of in the throes of caretaking for someone who's been really ill.
Right there, you see the first steps in helping people consolidate a positive memory for their loved one. The first step in helping people stay on Bonanno's resilience trajectory as they begin to move through grief. Next comes the ritual of Shiva.
Shiva is a mourning period of 7 days, and it has a series of rules which help a mourner who doesn't really know what to do and helps a community who doesn't always know how to support. It gives us like a roadmap for how you support and a roadmap for the mourner for how you mourn. And I think it brings tremendous comfort to kind of feel like, okay, I know what I'm supposed to do. It includes things you're not supposed to do, which is you're not supposed to go to work, you shave, you do proactively things like covering your mirrors, because this senses that you don't focus on yourself or your appearance at a time when you're in mourning. You don't have to think about that. The way you feel emotionally is embodied physically by sitting on low stools. You feel low spiritually and you sit on low stools.
These subtle parts of Shiva, covering mirrors, forgetting about your appearance, sitting on low stools, might seem like old relics of tradition or simple symbolic gestures. But in reality, they're extremely powerful ways to reduce grief, ways that science is only now beginning to understand. Take covering mirrors. Research shows that whatever emotion you're feeling, looking in a mirror will amplify it. So one way to reduce grief is to prevent mourners from seeing themselves while they're feeling it. Not shaving or worrying about your appearance? It turns out that reducing self-focus also reduces grief. So, to the extent you can get people to avoid worrying about how they appear, any sadness they're feeling will also dissipate a little. And sitting on low stools? It's not very comfortable. Your knees and lower back will begin to hurt after a bit, a hurt that's relieved once you stand up. New neuroscience research shows that the repeated onset and offset of mild discomforts like this actually reduces grief and rumination. Other religions use some of these features too. Mirrors are often covered at Irish wakes and in some Hindu ceremonies. But in my view as a psychologist, Shiva packages up all these elements in a brilliant fashion. Home visits are another example. When a family is in mourning, it's a mitzvah, a commandment, to visit, bring food, or otherwise offer help. It's not something that's just nice to do, if you feel like it. It's a responsibility. You have to do it. Being present when people need you, in the psychological literature, that's called instrumental support. And it's one of the biggest predictors of resilience in the face of loss.
These are the kinds of things that get established at Shiva to bring food so that the mourners don't have to worry about how they're eating. And also, the food functions in a social way for people to come and kind of stay for a while. And the main goal of Shiva is really both, of course, to comfort the mourners, but also to share stories of the one who's died. So it both reinforces your sense of connection with the person who's gone, but it also reinforces your sense of connection with your community. Your community shows up for you, they tell you stories, and you feel closer to all of them, and you're buoyed.
Over those 7 days, your community shows up not only to help you, but also to pray with you. Tradition says the mourner's Kaddish, or mourner's prayer, which is said in honor of the person who's passed, can't be said alone.
You need a minyan, which is a prayer quorum of 10 people to say the Kaddish. So that obligation alone means that a mourner is never going to be by themselves. They're not even going to only be with just their immediate family. They're going to need their community around them. And I love that that's built into it. You have to get a minyan. And you hear stories about people who call in, like, I know you live nearby, come on over. We need a minyan for Kaddish. But there's something about having your house filled that brings life back into a house of mourning. And the service itself is a way of connecting to something that feels eternal.
But here, too, the ritual of Shiva makes good use of how our brains work. As people recite the Kaddish in unison, often swaying together as they do so, they're engaging in synchronous motion. And to our brains, synchronous sound and motion are signals of togetherness, signals that have been shown to make even strangers feel more connected and compassionate toward one another. And during times of mourning, those feelings can be a powerful medicine. But the words of the Kaddish can also offer feelings of connection, not just to others, but to something greater and timeless.
These are prayers, the Kaddish prayers, centuries old. And you know that you're touching a prayer that your ancestors who are no longer here also said, and their ancestors before them said. And you have a sense that it's going to be said long after you're gone by your descendants. So that's part of what happens every time you say ancient prayers. That's part of why I believe religion done well is so powerful, because I think that it's a symbolic reminder, but it's very real. Like it's not just symbolic, it's true that people have said those exact words. When you connect yourself to that, you're reminding yourself that you're part of a much bigger story.
Curiously, although the mourner's Kaddish is a prayer for grief, there's no mention of death. It's all about praising God.
If you think of the prayer for death being praise of God, of life, I think that says so much about the Jewish view of life. We don't think of living life for the afterlife. There's not a strong view on what happens after we die. Our absolute emphasis is on life itself, is on how you live. And so, interestingly, even in death, we're taking a prayer that is mourning and actually really just saying, thank you, God, for giving us this life. That's really what it does. And it actually pushes us back to life over and over again. There's a famous line in the Torah which says, I've set before you life and death. Choose life. Now, that might seem so obvious, choose life. Of course, who wouldn't want to choose life? But I've actually you see time and again how sometimes choosing life is a courageous act. It can be a hard act for people, especially maybe after they've gone through tragedy. But I also think it's this idea that we're not living for the life that comes after. We're living for this life now. Choose life. Don't choose death.
The other thing it makes me think of too is that when you're praising God, you're affirming God and life as it is. I think it might also help you actually accept it, because sometimes when people die, there's this sense of anger at God. You want to curse God. This shouldn't have happened, and you get stuck in this resentment and anger. But by praising God and praising life, it kind of, to me, also reinforces that this is the normal way of life.
Yeah, even just the idea that we're going to bless God in the moment of death is a very strong Jewish idea and connects us. And then, we can also have those other feelings. I think that's important. In some ways, what you hope is that it's a reminder that every day that we have is precious. Funerals that really inspire are those ones that remind us, however many days we have, this is all we've got and we've got to live it well. And they inspire us to take on that life and not to live in anger with what's been taken away.
When the 7 days of Shiva end, it's time to begin a gentle re-entry into life, a 30-day period known as Shloshim, which means 30 in Hebrew. Like Shiva, it uses the body to nudge the mind. It starts with leaving the house, something most mourners haven't done during Shiva. It's a sign to the community, and perhaps more importantly, to the mourners themselves, that the journey of grieving is moving into its next stage.
The end of Shiva, kind of customary, you take a walk outside around your block. It's kind of like you finished the circuit. You are actually coming back into the world. And now you're in Shloshim, the 30-day period. And there you do have a gradual reentry. So there are things like going back to work that they suggest you do, but you maybe don't shave. So sometimes you'll see traditional Jews who didn't have a beard before, but by the end of Shloshim, they've got a beard. And again, it's an external marker as well as like meaning that it's something that they don't have to kind of care for their personal appearance in these days of mourning. I think another big one is that you're exempted and not supposed to go to celebrations. It's usually a protection because someone feels really bad if they're not going to your birthday party, but they're probably not in the mood in the first 30 days. So it actually kind of gives them an out. It acknowledges that you're not done mourning at 7 days, of course, but that you need actually to be prodded back into life. And I love that it just happens with the number of days. It's not where your emotional state is in a sense. And I think it kind of does force us. And some people are more ready than others. So Shloshim is the end of the formal mourning period for any relationship except a child for a parent, which you are actually obligated to say Kaddish for them for a full year. And that's the mourning period. I'm gonna say that there are many others who also mourn someone for longer than just 30 days, of course. But the idea is after that, you kind of go back into life and you try to honor their memory by living your life fully and finding ways to remember them and connecting with people they loved and all of those things.
But even when the formal period of mourning ends, you don't let people's memories fade. Jews mark the yahrzeit, the anniversary of a loved one's passing, as a way of honoring them and connecting death to life.
When someone is alive, you celebrate them on their birthday, which is the day that they came into the world. In Judaism, after someone dies, the way you remember them, we switch over to this idea of marking the day that they left the world. That might feel counterintuitive. Like, why would we want to celebrate this sad day? There is a beautiful midrash, which is a rabbinic teaching about two ships. One is leaving the port, sailing out with all of its wares. Everyone is celebrating. They're smashing the bottles against the boat, and they're celebrating the boat as it goes off on its journey. And there's a second ship that has done its job, sent all its wares to its correct places, and is coming back into the harbor with no fanfare whatsoever. The wise one notices this and says, here we are celebrating this one as it sets out on its life, like the way we celebrate birth, obviously. But we have no idea if they're going to be successful, if they're going to get through, what life storms are going to be, like how they're going to make it. Whereas this one that has done its job, has been to all these places and experienced life, is coming back safely into harbor. We should be celebrating that, the day that it returns. Helps demystify and make death a little less frightening and scary. That's the day we remember now. We mark and celebrate the day that they finished their journey, their beautiful journey on earth.
In celebrating someone's return, we're not just honoring the person who's passed, but as Rabbi Buchdahl says, making our own path forward an easier one, where we can find joy again in our journeys here and peace when it's time for us to return to our final harbor. It's a comforting thought, and perhaps what those who have left would want for their loved ones who remain. Next time, our last episode of the season, takes on that final episode of life.
Philosophy is an art of dying. And to philosophize is to learn how to die and to have death constantly kind of in your face.
We'll talk to philosopher and professor Simon Critchley about why we fear death.
Terror of annihilation.
That's fair.
Terror of annihilation.
And how we can better cope with this great, terrifying unknown.
If it's the fear of death that keeps us enslaved, then freedom consists in accepting our mortality.
And to hospital chaplains who help those at the end of their lives peacefully transition to what lies beyond.
Having a good death means being calm and at peace with your choices.
How God Works is hosted and written by me, Dave DeSteno. Our senior producer is Josie Holtzman of Future Projects. Associate producer is Sophie Eisenberg. Our editor is Ari Daniel. Our executive producer is Genevieve Sponsler. Music and post-production mix and master by Merritt Jacob. The executive producer of PRX Productions is Jocelyn Gonzalez. This podcast was made possible with support from the John Templeton Foundation.